In broad daylight, under a merciless African sun, a woman stood at the edge of a towering cliff. The sky was clear. The land was silent. There was nowhere for truth to hide. Her designer heels scraped against stone as strong hands dragged her forward. She turned eyes wide, not at strangers, but at faces she had once kissed goodnight. Children she had carried, children she had built an empire for. No, please, she whispered, her voice swallowed by the open air. Then came the push. Her body fell through blinding sunlight, not darkness. A gold ring slipped from her finger, flashing once as it spun, then vanished into the void below. Above the cliff, no one screamed. No one reached out. They believed the daylight would erase what they had done. They were wrong. Before we begin this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and your local time. And if stories of truth, betrayal, and justice move you, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Adesola Mensah was not born into comfort. Her story did not begin in boardrooms or behind polished desks. It began decades earlier in a dusty neighborhood on the outskirts of Ibadan, where roofs leaked when the sun burned too long and food was measured carefully, grain by grain. She was the eldest daughter of a cocoa trader who died young, leaving behind debts instead of savings. By the time Adesola was 22, she was already a widow, holding a newborn baby in one arm and a future full of uncertainty in the other. People often forgot that part of her story. By the time the world knew her name, Adesola Mensah had become one of West Africa's most powerful women, founder and CEO of Mensah Integrated Holdings, a vast empire spanning agricultural exports, logistics, cold storage facilities, and regional transport routes. Governments consulted her. Banks listened when she spoke. Young women quoted her speeches on social media. To the public, she was steel and strategy, a woman who never flinched. But inside the high walls of her mansion on the outskirts of Accra, Adesola was simply a mother. She woke before dawn every day, even after she became a billionaire. Old habits from poverty never truly leave you. She walked the garden herself, greeting the gardeners by name. She insisted on eating breakfast with her children whenever they were home, no matter how busy her schedule was. And when they were younger, she personally supervised their homework, sometimes falling asleep at the dining table with her glasses still on. She had raised 3 children, Kunle and Tunde alone. Kunle, the firstborn, carried himself like a prince who had never been denied. Tall, charming, and dangerously persuasive, he learned early how to speak in ways that made people agree with him, even when they didn't fully trust him. Adesola once believed leadership lived in him. Now, she wasn't so sure. Said the middle child was sharp and observant. She rarely raised her voice, preferring silence and calculated smiles. She had studied business abroad and returned with polished accents and expensive habits. She understood numbers, but not patience. And Tunde, the youngest, was once her soft spot. As a boy, he used to cling to her legs when she left for business trips, begging her not to go. Somewhere along the way, tenderness hardened into entitlement. They lived surrounded by luxury their mother never knew growing up. Private schools overseas, vacations, drivers, waiting at every corner. And yet none of them seemed satisfied. That troubled Adesola deeply. One evening, after a long board meeting, she sat alone in her home office, the city lights flickering beyond the tall glass windows. She removed her heels, slowly massaging her feet, exhaustion seeping into her bones. On her desk lay reports, profits were up, expansion plans approved, but her eyes drifted instead to a framed photograph. It showed her children years ago, standing barefoot in the rain, laughing as muddy water splashed around them. Back when they still laughed easily. "Where did I lose you?" she whispered to the room. Her concern wasn't sudden. For months, no years, she had watched her children change. They argued over allowances long after they should have been financially independent. They questioned her decisions in public, subtly undermining her authority. They talked about the company as if it already belonged to them. One night at dinner, Kunle had leaned back in his chair and said casually, "Mother, don't you think it's time you rested? You've done enough. Let the next generation take over." The words sounded respectful. The tone was not. Adesola looked at him calmly. "Rest is earned," she replied, "and leadership is not inherited like land. It is proven." Sade smirked, faintly swirling her wine. "But we are your legacy, Mama." Adesola met her daughter's eyes. "No," she said quietly. "Your character is your legacy." The table fell silent. What her children didn't know, what no one knew, was that Adesola had been planning something for a long time. She had watched other wealthy families tear themselves apart after death. Brothers suing brothers. Daughters selling off companies their parents had built with blood and sweat. She refused to let that be her story. So, she did what every strategic mind does when facing uncertainty. She prepared. In secret meetings with her lawyer and a trusted elder from her village, Adesola rewrote her will. Not out of fear of death, but out of fear of corruption. She designed it carefully, line by line, ensuring her wealth would not become a weapon in the hands of greed. Her children would inherit responsibility, not riches. The bulk of her fortune would be placed into a foundation focused on rural education, widows' empowerment, and agricultural training for young farmers. Her children would oversee parts of the business only if they proved integrity, transparency, and service. She knew they would be angry, but she did not expect hatred. The shift in her household was subtle at first. Conversations grew colder. Smiles became forced. When she entered a room, voices dropped. When she traveled, phone calls went unanswered. The love she once felt so surely around her now felt conditional, fragile, as if tied to something else entirely. Still, Adesola hoped. Hope is a stubborn thing in mothers. She believed that once her children understood her reasons, they would come around. That they would see she was protecting not just the company, but their souls. She was wrong. Very wrong. Because, while Adesola saw her children as heirs of values, they saw her as an obstacle standing between them and everything they believed they deserved. And behind closed doors, whispered conversations began to take place. Conversations filled with bitterness, impatience, and a single dangerous question. What if she was no longer in the way? Unaware of the storm forming inside her own bloodline, Adesola accepted an invitation that would change everything, a family retreat, Kunle called it. A chance to reconnect, to heal. A mother's heart wanted to believe him, and so she agreed. If gratitude could rust, it had long begun to corrode inside the hearts of Adesola Mensah's children. From the outside, they looked like a perfect legacy, educated, wealthy, polished. But inside the mansion, far from cameras and business partners, something darker had taken root. Something fed by impatience and entitlement. Kunle believed the world owed him leadership simply because he was firstborn. He walked through life with the confidence of a man who had never been told no, and when he was, he learned to hear it as a temporary inconvenience. In meetings, he interrupted senior executives twice his age. He spoke of expansion plans without understanding the fragile networks his mother had spent decades building. One afternoon, during a closed-door strategy session, Kunle leaned back in his chair and said, "With respect, Mother, this old-school caution is slowing us down. We should be aggressive, faster, bigger." Adesola didn't raise her voice. She rarely did. "Speed without wisdom destroys more than it builds," she replied. Kunle smiled, but it was thin, controlled, the kind of smile that hid resentment. Sade, on the other hand, was quieter. She observed everything. She had learned early that silence could be more powerful than noise. She noticed how executives still deferred to her mother, how the board waited for Adesola's nod before making decisions. And she hated it, not because her mother was wrong, but because she was still there. "She doesn't trust us," Sade whispered to Kunle one evening as they sat by the pool, city lights reflecting off the water. "That's what this is really about." Kunle scoffed. "She doesn't need to trust us. She just needs to step aside." Tunde, the youngest, listened more than he spoke. But when he did speak, bitterness spilled out in unexpected ways. He had grown up the most protected, the most indulged, and yet felt the most overlooked. He believed his mother saw him as a child, even now. "I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter," he muttered once, after Adesola questioned one of his reckless investments. "Everything I do," she corrects. "Everything." What none of them wanted to admit was this: they had never known hunger. They had never slept uncertain of tomorrow. They had never buried a spouse and still risen before dawn to fight for children who depended entirely on them. They did not know sacrifice. Their mother's wealth had insulated them from struggle, and over time that insulation turned into distance from her values, from her pain, from her humanity. The turning point came during a family dinner that was meant to be peaceful. Adesola had returned from a long trip to the north, where she'd visited rural farmers affected by drought. Her clothes still carried the scent of dust and sun. She spoke softly that night, sharing stories of women walking miles for water, of children studying under lantern light. "We have so much," she said gently, "and with that comes responsibility." Kunle placed his fork down. Responsibility to whom, he asked? To strangers who didn't build this company? Adesola looked at him surprised. To the people whose labor feeds our success. Sade sighed dramatically. "Mother, that sounds noble, but this is business. Sentiment doesn't keep companies alive." Adesola's voice remained calm, but something hardened behind her eyes. "Sentiment built this company," she said. "Love for my children, love for dignity, love for a future bigger than myself." Tunde pushed his chair back. "So, what about our future?" he snapped. "When do we matter?" The room went silent. Adesola stood slowly. "You matter," she said, "but not more than your character." That night, doors slammed. Conversations continued in whispers, and something shifted from frustration to something far more dangerous. Over the following weeks, the siblings met without their mother, sometimes in Kunli's penthouse apartment, sometimes in Saad's sleek office after hours. They spoke openly there without restraint, without guilt. "She's holding everything hostage," Kunle said one night, pacing. "The board listens to her. The lawyers listen to her, even the banks. And that will never change while she's alive," Sade replied quietly. The words hung in the air longer than anyone expected. Tunde looked up. "What are you saying?" Sade didn't answer immediately. She picked up her glass, swirled the contents slowly. "I'm saying time is not on our side." Kunle stopped pacing. He stared at her, careful. But he didn't shut her down. Instead, he sat. That was the moment something irreversible formed between them. Not a plan, not yet, but permission. Permission to think the unthinkable. They began justifying their thoughts the way people always do before crossing a line. "She's old. She's stubborn. She doesn't understand modern business. We deserve this." And beneath all of it lay the ugliest truth of all. They believed they were entitled to her life's work, simply by blood. Adesola sensed the distance growing wider. She felt it in the way her calls went unanswered, in the way conversations stopped when she entered a room, in the tension that wrapped around her like cold air. Still, she held on to hope. A mother always does. When Kunle suggested a family retreat, just us, Mama. No phones, no boardrooms. Let's reconnect. Something in her heart softened. She wanted to believe her children were reaching back toward her. "This could be good," she told her longtime assistant. "We've lost our way." The assistant hesitated. "Are you sure, ma'am?" Adesola smiled faintly. "They're my children." She did not know that by the time the invitation was extended, the idea of reconciliation had already been replaced by calculation. That what she saw as healing her children saw as opportunity. As the date approached, their conversations grew more focused, more deliberate. They chose a location far from city noise, a cliffside retreat overlooking vast empty land. Isolated, quiet, perfect. Adesola packed lightly. No security detail, no press. Just a mother hoping to bring her family back together. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the doorway of her bedroom, looking around at the life she had built, brick by brick, loss by loss. She touched the framed photo of her children when they were small. "I did this for you," she whispered. And somewhere else, miles away, her children spoke of inheritance as if it were already theirs. They had forgotten who built the road they now wanted to run on. And soon, they would commit an act that would change all of their lives forever. The will was not announced with drama. There were no flashing cameras, no grand speeches meant for the public. Adesola Mensah chose a quiet afternoon, one of those deceptively calm days when the city moved slowly and nothing seemed urgent. She summoned her children to the family conference room, a long oval table carved from dark wood, its surface polished smooth by decades of decisions. Her lawyer was already there. So was an elderly man from her hometown, Chief Adekunle, someone who had known Adesola before wealth had changed her address, but not her spine. Their presence alone should have warned her children that this was not an ordinary conversation. Kunle arrived first, confident, as always, phone in hand, smile rehearsed. Sade followed, composed, her expression carefully neutral. Tunde came last, shoulders tense, irritation barely concealed. "What's all this about?" Mama Kunle asked lightly, taking his seat at the head of the table, her seat. Adesola did not comment on that. She folded her hands and waited until everyone settled. "I won't waste your time," she began. Her voice was steady, neither warm nor cold. "I'm not ill. I'm not dying. But I've lived long enough to understand that clarity is a gift best given early." The lawyer slid a folder onto the table. "This," Adesola continued, "is my updated will." The air shifted. Sade straightened slightly. Tunde leaned forward. Kunle's smile widened just a fraction. None of them said thank you. None of them asked why. They assumed naturally that what followed would confirm what they already believed. Adesola nodded to the lawyer. He cleared his throat. In the event of Madame Mensah's death, he read the majority of her personal wealth, including liquid assets and controlling shares, will be transferred into the Mensah Community Trust. Silence fell like a dropped plate. Kunle blinked. "I'm sorry, what trust?" Adesola met his eyes. "A foundation," she said, "for rural education, agricultural training, and support for widows, causes that matter." Said's lips tightened. "And the company?" "The company remains operational," the lawyer replied, "but leadership succession will be conditional." Tunde frowned. "Conditional?" How Adesola answered herself. "You will not inherit power simply because you share my blood. Each of you will earn responsibility through service, transparency, and proven integrity." Kunle laughed. It came out sharp and humorless. "You're joking." "I am not," Adesola said. Saad placed her hands flat on the table. "Mother, this is extreme. You built this for us." "I built this so you would never be desperate," Adesola replied. "Not so you would become careless." Tunde stood abruptly. "So strangers get your money, and we get tests." "Conditioned strangers," Adesola echoed softly. "Those strangers are the people whose lives mirror the one I came from." Kunle pushed his chair back and stood too. "This is punishment," he said. "You don't trust us." "That's what this really is." Adesola's gaze did not waver. "Trust is not declared," she said. "It is demonstrated." The meeting ended without resolution. No one shouted. No one begged. They simply left one by one, faces tight with fury they refused to express openly. That night, the siblings gathered without their mother. They did not speak of reconciliation. They did not ask how to meet her standards. Instead, they spoke of betrayal. "She's humiliating us," Kunle said, pacing the length of the room, "making us look like children who need to be disciplined. She's giving away what belongs to us." Tunde added bitterly, "to people who don't even know her." Sade said nothing at first. She sat by the window, watching the city. Lights pulsed like distant signals. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and deliberate. "She's rewriting our future without us," she said, "and she knows it." Kunle stopped pacing. "So, what do we do?" That was the question. None of them had dared ask out loud before. Days passed, then weeks. The tension did not ease, it hardened. At family events, smiles were forced. Conversations were shallow. Every interaction felt like a negotiation neither side trusted. Adesola noticed everything. She saw the way Kunle avoided her eyes, the way Sade answered politely but without warmth, the way Tunde's temper flared at the smallest correction. Still, she did not retreat. She believed boundaries were an act of love, even when misunderstood. In private, her lawyer expressed concern. "They are angry," he warned gently. "I know," Adesola said. "Anger can teach if they let it. But anger left unchecked often seeks shortcuts." Behind her back, the siblings began testing their influence, calling board members, sounding out allies, measuring how much power they truly held without her. The answers frustrated them. Adesola's reputation was too strong, her authority too deeply rooted. "She's untouchable," Kunle muttered after one such call ended poorly. Sade's eyes flickered. "Not untouchable," she said. "Just in the way." The idea of a family retreat was born that night. Kunle presented it a week later. His tone softened, his expression carefully remorseful. "Mama," he said, "we've been wrong. We've been fighting instead of listening. Let's get away, just us. No lawyers, no board, no pressure." Adesola studied him. For a moment, she saw the boy he used to be, the one who held her hand crossing busy roads, the one who cried when she left for long trips. "We need time together," Kunle added, "before things break completely." Her heart ached with hope. Saad nodded in agreement. "We've forgotten how to be a family." Even Tunde managed a quiet please. Adesola agreed. She did not know that while she packed light and left her security behind her, children prepared something far heavier than luggage. That the will meant to teach them humility had instead convinced them that patience was no longer an option. To them, the document was not guidance. It was a threat. And threats, they believed, were meant to be eliminated. As the sun set on the day she signed that will, Adesola stood alone on her balcony, watching the city she had helped build. She felt uneasy, but not afraid. She had no idea that the words she had written to protect her legacy would become the very reason her children decided she could not be allowed to live. Betrayal rarely announces itself loudly. It grows quietly, nourished by resentment and watered with justification. By the time it shows its face, it already believes it is right. After the will was signed, something inside the Mensah household shifted permanently. The mansion still stood, immaculate and guarded, but the warmth that once lived there had thinned into something brittle. Adesola felt it in the silences longer, now heavier. She felt it in the way her children avoided shared spaces, as if the walls themselves had chosen sides. Kunle stopped coming home for dinner. When he did, he arrived late, distracted, his phone always in his hand. Saad became suddenly busy with consulting projects, staying out late and returning with tired eyes that never met her mother's. Tunde oscillated between anger and withdrawal, a restless storm that never quite broke. Adesola tried to reach them anyway. She invited them for breakfast. She asked about their work. She suggested family counseling, even laughed it off gently when they refused. "We'll talk when you're ready," she said, masking her worry behind patience she had learned the hard way. But patience in the wrong company looks like weakness. Behind her back, the siblings were meeting regularly now. The locations varied: Kunle's penthouse, overlooking the ocean, Saad's office after the staff had left, even a private room in a members-only lounge where questions were never asked. They spoke freely there, their words shedding pretense. She's playing chess while we're expected to wait for permission, Kunle said one night, pouring himself a drink. By the time she decides we're worthy, the best years will be gone. Tunde paced the room. She doesn't see us as adults. She never has. Saad listened, eyes narrowed. She sees us as risks, she said, and she's removing risk. Kunle scoffed. By handing our inheritance to villagers, by placing it somewhere we can't touch, Sadi corrected calmly. Unless she's gone. The room went quiet. Tunde stopped pacing. You keep saying that, he said. What does that mean? Sade didn't answer immediately. She reached for her bag and pulled out a document, an overview of the trust structure, public filings anyone could access. She laid it on the table. As long as she's alive, Sadi said, everything stays locked. The board won't move against her. The banks won't either. She is the anchor. Kunle stared at the paper, jaw tightening. So we're trapped. Not trapped, Sade said softly. Delayed. That night, lines were crossed in thought, if not yet in action. Each of them went home carrying a version of the same idea, turning it over in their minds, testing its weight. They began to rationalize. She's old, Kunle told himself. She's lived her life. She's stubborn, Tunde muttered. She refuses to listen. She's endangering the future, Saad concluded. And leaders make hard choices. Every justification made the next one easier. The plan did not arrive fully formed. It grew, piece by piece, suggestions, hypotheticals, quiet questions asked without waiting for answers. Kunle suggested isolation. Sade suggested distance from security. Tunde suggested locations, places far from witnesses, far from help. They told themselves it was only talk, but talk has momentum. When Kunle proposed a family retreat, the idea slid into place too smoothly to ignore. He framed it as healing as reconciliation. He practiced his tone before calling their mother, lowering his voice, softening his words. We've all been hurting, he said. We need time away from everything. Adesola heard the regret she wanted to hear. She did not hear the calculation underneath. Saad supported the idea with precision. She researched locations remote but accessible, scenic enough to feel like peace. She chose a cliffside lodge overlooking a vast stretch of land where the horizon swallowed sound and mobile reception weakened just enough to be unreliable. It's beautiful, she told her mother, showing her photos. You'll love it. Tunde handled the logistics, transportation, accommodation. He insisted it be just the family, no aides, no guards. Please, Mama, he said. Let's be normal for once. Adesola hesitated. Her assistant noticed. Ma'am, she said gently, perhaps security no. Adesola interrupted. She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. If my children want peace, I won't bring suspicion. She chose trust. The days leading up to the trip were filled with strange, quiet preparations. Kunle cleared his schedule completely. Sade canceled meetings without explanation. Tunde stopped calling his friends. Each of them withdrew into themselves, rehearsing conversations that would never happen, outcomes they refused to name aloud. On the morning of departure, Adesola dressed simply. She left her jewelry behind, choosing only a thin gold ring she had worn since her husband's death. As she walked through the mansion, she paused just once to look around, not because she sensed danger, but because something felt final. Her children watched her from a distance. Kunle studied her posture straight despite her age. Saad noted the calm in her face. Tunde avoided her eyes entirely. During the drive, conversation stayed polite, neutral, safe. The land grew quieter as the city fell away, buildings replaced by open sky and rock. Adesola looked out the window, taking it all in. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Kunle smiled. "You deserve this, Mama." The lodge sat near the edge of the cliff, perched as if daring gravity to make a decision. The air was warm. The sky was painfully clear. No storms, no darkness to hide behind. They settled in. Luggage unpacked, lunch served, and then little by little the masks began to slip. Small comments turned sharp. Old grievances surfaced. Accusations long buried were dragged into the open. Adesola tried to calm them, tried to redirect, but the tension had its own gravity, now pulling everything toward the edge. "You never trusted us," Tunde snapped during one heated exchange. "I trusted you with your lives," Adesola replied. "What more could a mother give?" Kunle's jaw clenched. Sade's eyes went cold. That afternoon, Kunle suggested a walk. "Just you and us," he said. "Let's clear the air." The path led toward the cliff. Adesola followed, still believing in words, still believing in blood. Behind her, her children exchanged glances, silent final. The seeds had been planted long ago. Now they were ready to bear fruit. And as Adesola stepped closer to the edge, unaware of how thin the line beneath her had become, betrayal, stood waiting, patient, justified, and convinced it was doing what needed to be done. The path narrowed as it approached the edge, the ground changing from packed earth to jagged stone. The sun stood high and unblinking, casting hard shadows that refused to soften anything it touched. There was no wind strong enough to cool the tension, only a dry heat that pressed against skin and patience alike. Adesola walked slightly ahead of them, her steps careful but unafraid. She had walked harder roads than this, roads lined with grief debt and sleepless nights. A cliff did not frighten her. What unsettled her was the silence behind her. No questions, no laughter, just the measured sound of footsteps that stopped when she stopped. "Here," Kunle said at last, gesturing toward the edge. "Look." The land opened beneath them, a vast stretch of rock and scrub falling away into distance. It was beautiful, in a severe way, honest, unforgiving. Adesola took it in slowly, hands clasped before her. "It reminds me of the farms in the north," she said, wide, exposed. "You see everything coming." No one answered. Saad stood to her left, arms folded, eyes fixed on the horizon. Tunde lingered a step behind, jaw-tight fingers, flexing as if testing their strength. Kunle positioned himself closest to Adesola, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Mother Sade said, her voice controlled, "We need to talk." Adesola turned to face them. "I'm listening." Kunle inhaled deeply, as though preparing for a speech. "This can't continue," he said. "The way things are, you holding everything, treating us like children." "I'm protecting what I built," Adesola replied evenly. "For you, for us," Tunde snapped. "You don't even trust us to run our own lives." Adesola's eyes softened. "Trust grows," she said. "It doesn't arrive fully formed." Sade stepped forward. You don't understand, she said quietly. The world has changed. You're holding us back. The words stung more than Adesola expected. Not because they were loud, but because they were rehearsed. I never stopped you from becoming more, Adesola said. I only asked that you become better. Kunle laughed. Then a short, sharp sound that echoed against the rock. Always the lesson, he said. Always the test. Adesola frowned. What is this really about? For a brief moment, something flickered in Kunle's eyes. Doubt, or perhaps memory. The image of a woman who had sold her wedding jewelry to pay his school fees, who had worked until her hands cracked so he could stand here strong and unafraid. But the moment passed. It's about the future, Kunle said, voice firm now. And you're standing in the way of it. Adesola took a step back, more out of instinct than fear. The ground beneath her heels shifted slightly. Pebbles rolled toward the edge and disappeared without sound. Careful, she said. This is dangerous ground. Saad's gaze flicked briefly to the cliff, then back to her mother. It doesn't have to be. Tunde swallowed hard. His voice shook when he spoke. You could change the will. Adesola looked at him. Truly. Looked at him. Is that what this is? She asked softly. A negotiation. Say you'll fix it, Kunle pressed. Say you'll put things back the way they should be. Adesola straightened. Something resolute settled into her posture. I won't, she said, because what you're asking me to fix is not the document. It's your hearts. Silence fell again, thick, suffocating. Kunle's expression hardened. Then you leave us no choice. The words landed heavier than a shout. Adesola felt it then the shift, the moment when conversation ended and intention took its place. Her breath caught, not in panic, but in disbelief. No, she whispered, you wouldn't. Saad looked away. Tunde closed his eyes. Kunle stepped closer. Adesola raised a hand not to shield herself, but as a plea. I am your mother. I know, Kunle said. That's what makes this hard. The shove came fast, decisive, practiced. Hands struck her shoulders, driving her backward, before she could regain balance. Her heels scraped against stone, searching for purchase that wasn't there. Time stretched. Adesola saw the sky widen above her impossibly blue. She saw Saad's face pale and set. She saw Tunde's hands reach out too late, or not at all. And then she was falling. The world flipped silently, sunlight blinding as rock rushed upward. Her breath tore from her chest. The air burned her lungs. She thought not of money, not of betrayal, but of the little boy Kunle once was crying in the dark because he was afraid to sleep alone. A sharp pain exploded through her side as she struck a ledge, then another. Her body tumbled, rolled, slammed. Something snapped. Something else went numb. Her gold ring slipped from her finger, catching the light as it spun away, a brief flash before vanishing into space. Above the edge remained unchanged. The land did not mourn. When the motion finally stopped, Adesola lay still among broken stone and dust. The sky framed her like a distant memory. Her chest rose once, twice, then shallowly. At the cliff's edge, Kunle stared down, heart-pounding, ears ringing. Is she? He began. Saad cut him off. We can't know, she said. We shouldn't stay. Tunde was shaking. What have we done? He whispered. Kunle forced himself to breathe. It's an accident, he said quickly. She slipped. That's what we say. Saad nodded, already thinking ahead. No one saw anything. There's no reception here. We call for help from the lodge. They walked away from the edge together. Their footsteps hurried now uneven. Below, unseen by them, Adesola's fingers twitched weakly against the stone. Blood pooled beneath her dark against the pale rock. Pain pulsed through her in waves so intense she could not scream. She drifted in and out, the world blurring at the edges. Voices echoed faintly, memories, or perhaps something else. Her husband's laugh, her children's cries, the hum of markets at dawn. She did not know how long she lay there. What she did not know, what her children did not know, was that the cliff did not finish her story. That beneath the edge they believed was final, the land twisted and sloped, offering not mercy, but possibility. And somewhere not far away, a different set of footsteps would soon approach, ones that did not carry entitlement or fear, but curiosity and compassion. Above the siblings rehearsed their lie. Below, a mother fought to live. By the time the rescue team arrived at the cliffside lodge, the story had already been rehearsed. Coonley stood at the front, hands on his head, pacing in short, frantic steps. His voice trembled as he spoke to the lodge manager, then to the first uniformed officer who appeared. She slipped. He kept repeating. We tried to grab her, but it happened so fast. Saad sat rigidly on a wooden bench, eyes red, her face composed into the careful shape of grief. She answered questions when asked, offering details that sounded reasonable, too reasonable. The time of the walk, the loose gravel, the sudden loss of footing. Tunde said very little. He stared at the ground, jaw-clenched hands trembling in his pockets. When an officer asked him directly what he saw, his voice cracked. She fell, he said. And then he turned away. Search teams descended the slope, carefully. Ropes anchored radios crackling with clipped instructions. The sun dipped lower as they worked, painting the land in long shadows. Below, they found blood on rock, torn fabric, signs of impact, but no body. The cliff, it seemed, had swallowed her whole. By nightfall, the official report was cautious but grim. Given the height and terrain, the lead officer said survival is unlikely. Unlikely. That word spread faster than truth ever does. By the next morning, headlines had formed their own conclusions. African business icon, presumed dead in tragic accident. Billionaire philanthropist falls to her death during family retreat. Photos of Adesola Mensah filled screens across the continent. Her achievements were listed, her generosity praised, her strength admired. Commentators spoke of her legacy in the past tense. At the mansion, preparations began immediately. A memorial service was announced within days. Black fabric draped the gates. Wreaths arrived in waves sent by politicians, CEOs, international partners. Messages of condolence flooded in from around the world. Her children received them all. Kunle stood before cameras, shoulders squared, voice heavy with practiced sorrow. Our mother was our foundation, he said. Her loss is immeasurable. Saad wept softly during interviews, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, speaking of her mother's wisdom and sacrifice. She taught us everything, she said. We will honor her. Tunde avoided the press altogether. Behind closed doors, however, the house felt hollow. The staff moved quietly, unsure where to place their loyalty now. Some whispered doubts. Others said nothing, afraid to lose their jobs. The lawyer arrived 2 days later. The will, he said carefully, sitting across from Kunle in the study. We must proceed according to its terms. Kunle nodded solemnly. Of course. Inside his chest tightened, because the will did not change. Death, or presumed death, had not unlocked anything. The trust remained. The conditions remained. The company would be overseen temporarily by the board until further review. She really did plan everything, Kunle muttered after the lawyer left. Side said nothing, but her expression darkened. They had crossed a line they believed would end the problem. Instead, the problem remained frozen in legal language and public reverence. Still, they told themselves it would resolve in time. Bodies are eventually found. Paperwork moves. Influence can be applied. And so they buried their doubts beneath ceremony. The memorial was grand, held at a civic hall large enough to contain the weight of her reputation. A massive portrait of Adesola stood at the front, her expression calm, eyes steady, almost watchful. People spoke of her as if she were a force of nature. She changed the face of African enterprise. She lifted communities. She proved what was possible. Her children sat in the front row, dressed in black. They bowed their heads at the right moments. They accepted embraces. They said thank you. Yet not one of them cried the way children cry when they lose a parent. Kunle's grief was tight contained. Sade's was elegant. Tunde's was silent and consuming. That night, long after the guests had gone, Tunde wandered into his mother's bedroom. The room was untouched. Her scent lingered faintly in the air. He picked up her glasses from the bedside table, holding them like something fragile. "What have we done?" he whispered. There was no answer. Across the city, far from cameras and condolences, something else was happening. Adesola Mensah did not die at the bottom of the cliff. She lay instead in a shallow ravine several meters below. The point of impact, her body wedged between rock and brush. The fall had broken bones, torn muscle, stolen breath, but it had not taken her life. She drifted in and out of consciousness for hours, maybe longer. Time lost its shape. When she woke, it was to pain so sharp it blurred the edges of reality. Her mouth was dry. Her vision swam. She tried to move and screamed a thin, broken sound that echoed weakly against stone. Somewhere above, birds cried. She did not know where she was. She did not know how she had fallen. Only that she was alone, injured, and very far from help. As night crept in, cold replacing heat, she slipped again into darkness. She would have died there. But fate, it seemed, had not finished with her. Early the next morning, a young boy and his mother walked the lower trails gathering firewood. The boy stopped suddenly, head tilting. "Mama," he said, "did you hear something?" They listened. A sound rose faintly from the ravine. A moan, human, weak. They followed it carefully, calling out. When they saw her bloodied, barely conscious, the woman gasped. "She's alive," she whispered. They did not know her name. They did not recognize her face. They only knew one thing. They could not leave her there. As the world mourned a woman it believed was gone forever, Adesola Mensah was being carried slowly, painfully, toward a future none of them had imagined. Above ground, her children began planning life without her. Below, She breathed, and that was enough. When Adesola opened her eyes again, the world no longer felt like stone and sky. It smelled of smoke and herbs. The light was softer, filtered through a cracked window covered with a thin cloth. Pain still lived in her body, deep and unrelenting, but it no longer came in waves violent enough to steal her breath. She tried to move. A sharp ache flared through her ribs, and she groaned. "Easy," a woman's voice said quickly. "Please, don't try yet." Adesola turned her head slightly. The room was small mud walls, a low wooden bed, a mat on the floor. Beside her sat a woman in worn clothing, her face lined by years of sun and worry. A boy stood near the doorway, clutching a bundle of firewood, eyes wide with fear and curiosity. "Where am I?" Adesola whispered. The words scraped her throat. "You are safe," the woman replied gently. "My name is Bisi. This is my son Lacan. We found you near the ravine." The ravine. Fragments stirred in Adesola's mind. Sunlight voices, a sudden loss of balance. Her chest tightened, but the memory refused to settle into something clear. She closed her eyes, dizzy. "You fell," Bisi continued. "Your body was broken. We carried you as best we could. I sent Lekan to fetch help, but the nearest clinic is far. We did what we could." Adesola swallowed. "Thank you," she said. The words felt small compared to what they had done. Days passed in a slow blur. Pain anchored her to the present, while confusion clouded the past. Bisi tended to her wounds with careful hands, using boiled water and herbs passed down from her mother. Lekan brought water, fetched firewood, and watched over her silently, as if afraid she might disappear if he looked away too long. At night, Adesola drifted in and out of sleep, haunted by half-formed dreams, children's laughter turning sharp, a woman falling through light, a ring slipping away. She woke each time, with her heart racing, tears soaking the mat beneath her head. But when she reached for memory, it slipped from her grasp. "Do you know your name, Bisi?" asked gently one morning. Adesola opened her mouth. Nothing came. She frowned, panic rising. I don't know," she said slowly. "I know how to speak. I know numbers. I know things. But not that." Bisi nodded, unsurprised. "Head injuries do that," she said. "It may return, or it may not." Adesola stared at the ceiling, grief settling into her chest without a clear cause. She felt she had lost something precious, something vast, but could not name it. Weeks passed. Her body healed unevenly. One leg remained weak. Her ribs ached constantly. But she could sit up now, then stand, then take a few careful steps with Lekan's help. She learned about Bisi's life in pieces. A widow. Her husband gone to an illness that took him quickly and left nothing behind. She survived by selling smoked fish at the roadside, earning barely enough to feed herself and her son. "You saved me," Adesola said one evening, watching Bisi count coins by lantern light. Bisi shook her head. "Life brought you to us," she said. "That is all." Adesola felt something stir inside her, an unfamiliar humility, sharp and grounding. She had lived a life of command and certainty, she sensed that much. Here she was dependent, and strangely, that dependence did not diminish her. It stripped her down to something truer. As her strength returned, so did fragments of memory uninvited, incomplete. She remembered the smell of polished wood, the sound of meetings, the weight of expectation. Faces, three of them, hovered at the edge of recognition, always just out of reach. Each time she tried to grasp them, her head throbbed fiercely. One afternoon, while Lacan slept outside, Bisi spoke quietly. People came asking about a woman who fell, she said. They said she was rich. Important. Adesola's heart skipped. Did you tell them about me? No, Bisi replied. I said we saw nothing. Adesola exhaled a mix of relief and unease washing over her. Why? Bisi looked at her carefully. Because whoever pushed you to that cliff might still be looking. The word pushed echoed sharply. Adesola's breath caught. Her head pulsed. Images surged. Voices raised anger, the ground slipping away. She cried out, clutching her temples. Bisi was at her side instantly. Shh. Don't force it. Adesola wept, then not from pain, but from the terror of knowing something terrible had happened and being unable to fully remember it. That night, she lay awake staring into darkness. If she had been pushed, by whom? And why? As weeks turned into months, Adesola began to help around the small compound. She cleaned fish. She cooked. She sat with other women in the village, listening to stories of hardship spoken without bitterness. Their strength humbled her. She had no jewelry, no phone, no identity. For the first time in her life, no one expected anything from her. And in that quiet anonymity, something healed that had long been bruised. One afternoon, while through sorting dried maize, she overheard a radio broadcast crackling in the background. A familiar name floated through the static. The late Adesola Mensah. Her hands froze. She turned slowly toward the radio. The announcer spoke of a foundation bearing her name, of a legacy, of a woman remembered as a giant. Her heart pounded violently. That's me, she whispered. The room tilted. Memory slammed back into place, not gently, but like a door thrown open in a storm. The mansion, the will, the cliff, her children, her children. Adesola collapsed to the floor sobbing. Bisi knelt beside her, holding her, as the truth poured out in broken fragments. When Adesola finally lifted her head, her eyes were different, clearer, sharper. They tried to kill me, she said quietly. Bisi said nothing. She did not need to. In the days that followed, Adesola thought deeply. Rage rose, but it did not take control. She had survived something meant to end her. Survival, she realized, was not permission for revenge. It was an opportunity for reckoning. She made a decision. She would not return as the woman she had been. She would return as the woman her children had never known. With Bisi's help, she contacted a distant legal aid office using a borrowed phone, carefully anonymously. She asked questions. She listened. She learned how much had changed in her absence. And she waited. 1 year after the world buried Adesola Mensah, she stood at the edge of a different life, no longer broken, no longer lost. She was alive, and she was ready. The world had moved on without her. That was the first truth Adesola learned as weeks turned into months after her memory returned. News reports spoke of her in the past tense. Awards were accepted in her name by others. Her foundation had been launched with ceremony and speeches she never gave. Her face appeared on billboards honoring a legacy she was not allowed to claim. She watched it all from a distance. Adesola did not rush back. She did not call the police. She did not appear at the gates of her mansion demanding answers. The woman who had survived the cliff understood something her old self had not: truth without timing is wasted, and justice without preparation becomes noise. So she waited. She stayed in the village with Bisi and Lacan, slowly rebuilding her body and mind. The limp in her leg faded to a dull reminder. The pain in her ribs softened. What remained was the ache in her chest, the realization that her children had chosen inheritance over humanity. At night, she replayed the fall in her mind. The words, the look in Kunle's eyes, the silence from Sade, Tunde's hesitation. Each memory sharpened with time, not into rage, but into clarity. "They didn't just push me," she said once to Bisi, staring into the fire. "They erased me." Bisi stirred the pot quietly. "Sometimes," she said, "people erase what reminds them of who they are not." Adesola nodded. She began to move carefully, adopting a new name, Amina, and traveling modestly. She worked with small cooperatives, offering advice without revealing its source. She helped women organize savings groups. She listened to farmers speak of transport costs and storage losses, problems she had solved years ago with money and scale. Now, she solved them with patience and trust. No one knew who she truly was, and for the first time in decades, that felt like freedom. In the cities, her children struggled. Without her steady hand, Mensah Integrated Holdings became unstable. Kunle pushed expansion too fast, taking risky loans that alarmed the board. Saad manipulated numbers to maintain appearances, but cracks showed in the margins. Tunde bounced between projects, burning cash without results. They argued constantly about control, about blame, about who should have stopped what. She would have known what to do. Tunde snapped one night, slamming his glass down. Kunle glared at him. She would have blocked it, he said, like she always did. Saad said nothing, but her silence spoke of unease. The board began asking questions. Investors whispered. Employees left quietly, taking institutional memory with them. The empire Adesola had built did not collapse, but it wobbled. And still, the trust remained untouchable. Adesola learned all this through careful channels. Old allies who still respected her principles. Lawyers who spoke in hypotheticals. Journalists who mentioned rumors without names. She took notes. She observed patterns. Most importantly, she learned who had stayed honest when she was gone and who had not. By the 9th month, she had quietly assembled a small circle. A retired judge known for integrity, a former operations director she had once mentored, and a young investigative journalist with a reputation for patience. None of them knew her full story at first. She presented facts, slowly testing trust, as she once taught her children to do. When she finally told them who she was, disbelief gave way to resolve. "You're saying they attempted murder," the judge said quietly. "I'm saying they pushed me," Adesola replied. "The law can decide the rest." Evidence gathering began, not rushed, not reckless. Phone records, financial inconsistencies, the lodge's guest logs, statements from staff who had been pressured to change timelines. A pattern emerged clearer than any single accusation. Adesola remained in the shadows. On the anniversary of her presumed death, the city held a charity gala in her honor. Her children stood on stage beneath her portrait, speaking of resilience and vision. Applause thundered. Adesola watched from a small television in a roadside cafe, her face hidden beneath a scarf. "They look comfortable," BC said softly. "Yes," Adesola replied, "too comfortable." That night, she made the final decision. She would return, not as a ghost seeking revenge, but as a living witness demanding truth. But she would do it on her terms. In the final weeks before her reappearance, she set her affairs in order. She ensured BC and Lekanai were provided for, quietly securing a home and education funds through intermediaries. She transferred advisory roles to trusted leaders in the cooperatives she had helped build, refusing to become indispensable. "Why not stay?" BC asked one evening. "You've done good here." Adesola smiled sadly. "Because running does not heal," she said. "Facing does." On the morning she left, Lekan hugged her tightly. "Will you come back?" he asked. Adesola knelt, meeting his eyes. "The world is bigger than one place," she said, "but you will always be part of mine." As she traveled back toward the city by bus, by train, by borrowed car, she felt no fear, only a steady resolve. The woman who had fallen from the cliff was gone. In her place stood someone tempered by loss and stripped of illusion. She did not crave apologies. She did not seek forgiveness. She sought truth, and truth she knew would not be gentle. As the city skyline came into view, Adesola removed her scarf and sat up straighter. The sun caught her face, revealing lines that spoke of survival rather than age. 1 year after the world buried her, she stepped back into its light, unannounced, unrecognized, and unstoppable. The shadows had taught her everything she needed. Now it was time. An empire does not collapse the moment its founder disappears. It weakens quietly, the way a body does when the heart no longer keeps the rhythm. In the first months after Adesola Mensah's presumed death, Mensah Integrated Holdings looked stable from the outside. Offices opened on time. Contracts were signed. Press releases spoke of continuity and confidence. Kunle stepped forward as acting leader. His speeches polished his ambition loud. But those who had worked closely with Adesola felt the absence immediately. Decisions that once took a single phone call now dragged through endless meetings. Small problems grew into delays. Delays turned into losses. And losses, once hidden, began to surface. Kunle believed boldness would prove his worth. He approved expansions into unfamiliar regions without proper groundwork. He ignored warnings from logistics managers who spoke of unstable routes and unreliable partners. "We can't afford hesitation," he told the board. "Momentum is everything." Adesola had once said the opposite: momentum without direction is just speed toward disaster. Sadie took control of finances, or at least tried to. She understood spreadsheets better than people, and for a time, she managed to hide the cracks. She shifted numbers, reclassified expenses, postponed reports. On paper, the company still breathed. But paper cannot hide truth forever. Suppliers complained of late payments. Farmers called regional offices, angry and confused. Employees whispered about salaries arriving days late, then weeks. Tunde drifted between departments, demanding authority without responsibility. He launched side projects fueled by company money, each one promising innovation and delivering nothing. When questioned, he deflected blame. "No one supports me," he complained. "Mother would have." The irony was lost on him. The board grew uneasy. Adesola had been their anchor, the one voice capable of cutting through noise and ego. Without her, meetings became battlegrounds, Kunli's aggression clashing with Sadi's calculation, Tunde's insecurity erupting at the worst moments. Outside the company, the foundation bearing Adesola's name flourished. That truth burned. The Mensah community, trust protected by ironclad legal structure, began funding schools, clinics, and training centers across rural regions. People spoke of Adesola with gratitude and reverence. Her name appeared in headlines tied to hope. Meanwhile, the company associated with her children struggled under quiet scrutiny. She cared more about strangers than her own blood. Kunle snapped one night, slamming a newspaper onto the table. "Look at this." Said read the article without expression. "She cared about responsibility," she said. Tunde scoffed. "Easy to say when she's gone." The words lingered too long. Guilt crept in unexpectedly late at night in moments of silence. Kunle woke from dreams where his mother stood at the edge of the cliff, unafraid, watching him with disappointment rather than anger. Saad found herself rereading her mother's old notes, the margins filled with careful questions instead of commands. Tunde drank more, trying to drown the memory of hesitation the second he might have stopped everything and didn't. Still, none of them spoke of that day. They couldn't afford to. By the 10th month, investors demanded answers. The board called for an external audit. Kunle resisted, citing timing and market perception. "Transparency builds confidence," one director insisted. "Transparency invites panic." Kunle shot back. The vote passed anyway. As auditors arrived, so did journalists drawn by whispers of mismanagement. Articles began to appear, careful but probing. Questions surround Mensah Holdings' direction. Can the empire survive? Without its founder, Said worked overtime to contain the damage, but the truth pushed through her efforts like roots through concrete. Numbers told stories she could not silence forever. At the same time, something else unsettled them. Rumors. A woman was being mentioned in circles. They did not control a consultant, a strategist, someone advising cooperatives and small enterprises with uncanny insight. People spoke of her leadership style with words that felt uncomfortably familiar. She listens first. She asks the right questions. She builds systems, not dependents. Said heard the whispers first. She dismissed them as coincidence until a former executive approached her quietly after a conference. "She reminds me of your mother," he said. Saad laughed too quickly. "That's impossible." But the words lodged themselves deep. Kunle brushed off the rumors. "People love myths," he said. "They want to believe she's still guiding things." Tunde said nothing. He felt watched in ways he could not explain. Behind the scenes, Adesola observed everything. She attended meetings under her adopted name. She listened to farmers complain about delayed shipments from her own company. She spoke with employees who no longer recognized her, but still spoke of her with loyalty. "They don't respect leadership anymore," one manager said bitterly. "They fear it." Adesola took notes. She did not interfere. Not yet. When the audit results leaked partial, but damning the board had no choice. Emergency sessions were called. Kunle defended his decisions loudly. Sadi argued for restructuring. Tunde stormed out twice. The empire did not fall, but it staggered. Public trust eroded, share value dipped, partners hesitated. And through it all, Adesola remained unseen, gathering the final pieces. One evening, Kunla stood alone, in his office, city lights flickering below. He stared at his reflection in the glass, adjusting his tie again and again. "This was supposed to be ours," he muttered. Across the city, in a modest apartment, Adesola closed a folder filled with evidence timelines and witness statements. She looked at the date on the cover. Tomorrow. The empire without its queen had revealed everything she needed to know. And soon it would face her, not as a memory, not as a legend, but as a living woman who refused to disappear. Under the name Amina Adesola, learned what it meant to lead without power. She moved quietly through communities that never appeared on balance sheets, villages where ambition was measured in school fees and harvest yields, not profit margins. Here, people did not care about titles. They cared about whether promises were kept. Amina arrived without announcements. She sat on plastic chairs under mango trees. She listened while women spoke of loans that trapped them and middlemen who took advantage of desperation. She watched young men struggle to move produce without storage, losing weeks of work to rot and heat. She asked questions, not the kind meant to impress, but the kind that uncovered patterns. Who decides the price? Where does the truck stop? What happens when the rain comes early? The answers formed maps in her mind. She began to help carefully, deliberately introducing systems that empowered rather than replaced. Savings groups that rotated leadership. Cold boxes built from locally available materials. Transparent ledgers kept by people who had never been trusted with numbers before. She insisted on training before funding, accountability before expansion. At first, people were suspicious. "You're different," an elder told her. "Most come with money and instructions." Amina smiled. "Money leaves when it's done talking," she said. "Systems stay." Her reputation grew, not loudly, but reliably. Cooperatives began sharing transport routes. Women negotiated prices together. Losses shrank. Confidence grew. And with every success, Adesola felt a quiet reckoning inside herself. She had built an empire once through force of will and discipline. Now, she built something else through patience and shared ownership. The work humbled her. It reminded her that leadership was never about being needed. It was about making yourself unnecessary. At night, she wrote in a notebook lessons she had learned too late the first time. Power reveals character. Silence teaches more than speech. If people fear you, they will hide the truth. She also prepared for her return. The retired judge reviewed timelines with care. The investigative journalist verified sources without shortcuts. The former operations director cross-checked financial inconsistencies that aligned with the period after her disappearance. Everything pointed the same way. "She didn't slip," the judge said finally. "And they didn't just benefit, they orchestrated." Adesola nodded. "I don't want a spectacle," she said. "I want the truth to stand." "Truth always stands," the journalist replied. "But it needs a stage." They planned it carefully. Not a dramatic confrontation at her mansion. Not a public accusation shouted into microphones. Instead, a moment that could not be dismissed, a return that forced accountability. Meanwhile, her children continued unraveling. Kunle's bravado began to crack as lenders tightened terms. He argued more, listened less. Saad grew exhausted, her careful calculations unable to keep pace with reality. Tundi's projects collapsed one by one, each failure sharpening his resentment. And then came the rumors again, stronger now. Amina had advised a regional cooperative that secured a landmark export deal. Amina had helped restructure a failing logistics route, one that Mensah Holdings had abandoned months earlier. Amina's methods were being studied by universities. "Who is she?" Coonley demanded during a board meeting. "No one important," Sade replied too quickly. But when Sade attended a closed forum and saw Amina speak calm, incisive commanding, without raising her voice, something inside her recoiled. The cadence, the questions, the way the room leaned in, it was impossible. That night, Saad opened her mother's old files searching for comfort. Instead, she found notes, plans for community-first logistics, cooperative ownership, models, safeguards against internal corruption, plans they had ignored, plans now being implemented by someone else. By Amina, Saad slept poorly. Dreams returned of the cliff of daylight of silence. Adesola sensed the time drawing near. She visited Bisi and Lacan one last time before her public return. They shared a simple meal. Laughter came easily now, tinged with something like goodbye. "You don't owe us anything," Bisi said softly, "but you gave us more than you know." Adesola took Bisi's hands. "You gave me my life," she replied. "I will never forget that." She placed documents on the table, education funds, housing deeds, business support, arranged through trusted intermediaries. "This isn't charity," Adesola said firmly. "It's partnership." Lekin looked up at her. "Will people know who you are now?" Adesola smiled. "Some will," she said. "Others will only know what I stand for." The next morning, she boarded a bus into the city wearing a tailored jacket and no disguise. She carried herself the way she always had quietly assured. The city did not recognize her at first. It never does when truth returns without warning. The event was scheduled for noon, a leadership forum on ethical enterprise attended by board members, investors, journalists. Amina was listed as a speaker. Kunle arrived irritated already, bracing for criticism. Saad took her seat near the aisle, pulse quickening. Tunde hovered near the back, uneasy. When Amina stepped onto the stage, the room settled. She spoke plainly about governance, about trust, about what happens when leadership mistakes inheritance for entitlement. Her words were measured, surgical. Heads nodded, pens moved. Then she paused. "My name," she said, "is Adesola Mensah." The room inhaled as one. Faces froze. Murmurs surged. Said's hand flew to her mouth. Kunle stood halfway out of his seat, color draining from his face. Tunde felt the floor tilt beneath him. Adesola continued unflinching. "1 year ago, I was declared dead. I am not." She did not accuse. She did not shout. She presented facts, dates, records, testimony, each one a stone placed carefully into the truth. She spoke of survival, of silence, of preparation. And finally, she spoke of choice. "I am not here for revenge," she said. "I am here because leadership demands accountability, especially from those closest to us." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in clarity. Cameras flashed. Journalists leaned forward. Board members exchanged looks that said, "It's over." Adesola looked toward her children, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a calm that cut deeper than either. A new name taught me a new purpose, she said. Now the truth can do its work. The room did not explode into noise the way people expected. It froze. Cameras hovered in midair, reporters holding their breath as if a sudden sound might shatter the moment. Board members stared at the woman on stage alive, composed, undeniably real, while security staff glanced uncertainly at one another, unsure whether to move or stand still. Adesola Mensah remained where she was, hands relaxed at her sides, eyes steady. She had not returned with drama. She had returned with facts. Kunle was the first to find his voice. This is impossible, he said, stepping forward, his tone wavering between outrage and panic. You were declared dead. There was an investigation. There was an assumption, Adesola replied calmly. Not an investigation. Her voice carried without effort, cutting through the murmurs that had begun to ripple across the hall. Sade stood slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her face had gone pale, the carefully maintained composure cracking at the edges. Mother. She said the word sounding unfamiliar on her tongue. Why are you doing this here? Adesola turned to her. Because truth belongs where decisions are made, she said, and because silence has already cost too much. Tunde did not stand. He could not. His hands trembled in his lap, memories crashing over him, the shove, the fall, the way he had looked away. Tears welled before he could stop them. The moderator attempted to regain control. Madam Mensah, he said cautiously, perhaps this session. No, Adesola interrupted gently. This session is exactly where it should be. She nodded to the retired judge seated near the front. He rose his presence, commanding respect without spectacle. What you are witnessing, the judge said, is not a performance. It is a disclosure. Evidence has been submitted to the appropriate authorities. This form was chosen to ensure transparency, not accusation. Files appeared on the screen behind them. Timelines, call records, financial transfers, inconsistencies in lodge reports. Each slide landed like a quiet verdict. Kunle shook his head violently. You're twisting things, he said. We loved you. It was an accident. Adesola's gaze did not leave him. If it was an accident, she asked softly, why did no one come looking for me? The question hung unanswered. Sadi's voice broke. We thought you were gone. No, Adesola said. You decided I was gone. The audience shifted, the weight of the moment pressing down. Journalists typed furiously. Phones buzzed with messages spreading the news faster than any official statement ever could. Adesola took a step forward. I am not here to reclaim titles, she said. I am here to reclaim truth. She turned to the board. Mensah Integrated Holdings does not belong to my name alone. It belongs to the people who trusted us. Farmers, workers, partners. They deserve leadership, guided by responsibility, not fear. The board chair cleared his throat. Madam Mensah, he said, choosing his words carefully, the board will convene immediately. Adesola nodded. As it should. Security moved not toward her, but toward the exits. The authorities had arrived, quietly summoned long before the forum began. They did not grab or shout. They observed. They documented. Coonley backed away slowly, his confidence evaporating. "You planned this," he whispered. "Yes," Adesola replied, "because chaos helps no one." Sade sank back into her chair, face in her hands. For the first time since childhood, she looked small. Tunde finally stood. He walked toward his mother, each step heavy. "I should have stopped it," he said, tears spilling freely now. "I didn't push you, but I didn't stop them." Adesola looked at him for a long moment. That she said quietly is something you will have to live with. The words were not cruel. They were honest. As the forum adjourned, the hall erupted not into anger, but into urgent motion. Reporters rushed for statements. Lawyers whispered into phones. Board members clustered together. Adesola stepped away from the stage, escorted not by guards, but by those who recognized authority when they saw it. Outside, the sun was high. Life continued. Kunle was questioned. Sade was questioned. Tunde was questioned. No handcuffs yet. Just facts meeting daylight. By evening, the story dominated every channel. Billionaire mother returns from the dead, truth emerges in attempted murder case, empire faces reckoning. Adesola did not give interviews. She returned to a modest apartment, prepared for her, surrounded by files and silence. The city buzzed, but she felt calm. That night, she slept without dreams. The next morning, she visited the foundation offices, not as a symbol, but as a worker. She spoke with staff, reviewed programs, approved expansions rooted in accountability. When asked about her children, she answered simply, "The law will do its work." Days later, the board announced interim leadership, experienced, ethical, independent. Kunle was suspended pending investigation. Sadi stepped down voluntarily. Tunde entered counseling as part of a cooperation agreement. The mansion remained quiet. Adesola visited it once briefly. She walked through rooms filled with echoes and paused at the family photo on the wall. She did not remove it. She did not add to it. Some stories she knew must remain unfinished. As she left, she locked the door behind her, not out of anger, but acceptance. Her return had not been about reclaiming a throne. It had been about restoring balance. And for the first time since the cliff, Adesola felt something close to peace. Truth does not arrive all at once. It advances document by document, voice by voice, until denial has nowhere left to stand. In the days following Adesola Mensah's return, the city shifted into a different rhythm. Court filings replaced press releases. Subpoenas replaced invitations. The spectacle faded and the work began. Investigators moved quietly but decisively. Phones were examined. Emails recovered. Financial trails mapped. The lodge staff were interviewed again, this time, without pressure, without whispered instructions about what to forget. One by one, small inconsistencies turned into a pattern too precise to ignore. Kunle's version of events unraveled first. He had insisted that Adesola slipped during a family walk, but call logs showed frantic messages sent before the emergency call messages that contradicted the timeline he had sworn to. GPS data placed him closer to the cliff's edge than he admitted, and a deleted voice note recovered from cloud storage revealed a moment of raw panic. "She's not moving," the voice said. "What do we do?" The question alone told a story. Said's involvement emerged differently, cleaner, quieter, more deliberate. Financial records showed payments to a lodge supervisor weeks before the trip, labeled as consulting fees. Witnesses recalled her insistence that security be minimized, that routes be changed, that staff rotate shifts. She was very specific. One employee testified. Too specific. Emails surfaced carefully, worded indirect, but unmistakable in intent. We need privacy. No interruptions. Family matters. Sade watched the evidence pile up from behind a glass partition, her expression locked somewhere between shock and resignation. She did not cry. She did not argue. She stared at the table as if studying a puzzle she had failed to solve. Tunde's role was the most painful to reveal. He had not pushed. He had not planned, but he had known something was wrong. Text messages showed him asking questions days before the trip questions that went unanswered. A message sent hours after the fall, never delivered, read, "This is not what I agreed to." The investigators looked at him with measured eyes. "Why didn't you come forward?" one asked. Tunde's voice cracked. "Because I was afraid," he said, "and because I thought it was already too late. The law does not reward fear, but it considers truth." As proceedings advanced, Adesola remained largely absent from public view. She met with prosecutors privately, answered questions carefully, and refused opportunities to shape the narrative in her favor. "This is not my trial," she said firmly. "It's theirs." Still, when she did speak, people listened. At a closed hearing, she described the walk to the cliff, her children's voices, the sudden shift in tone, the moment she realized words were no longer enough. "I did not fall," she said. "I was pushed." She did not name who. She did not need to. Her restraint spoke louder than accusation ever could. Public reaction followed a familiar arc shock, anger, grief. Commentators debated motives. Strangers argued online about justice and forgiveness. Some demanded harsh punishment. Others searched for explanations that might soften the blow. How could children do this to their own mother? Adesola refused to answer that question. Meanwhile, the board of Mensah Integrated Holdings released a statement acknowledging failures and oversight and announcing sweeping reforms. Independent leadership was installed. Safeguards were strengthened. The company pledged cooperation with authorities and transparency with stakeholders. For many employees, the reckoning was bittersweet. "We always knew something was wrong," a warehouse supervisor said quietly to a reporter. "We just didn't know how wrong." The foundation continued its work uninterrupted by design. Its structure had protected it from the storm. Clinics opened. Schools expanded. Farmers received training. In villages, far from the city, Adesola's name remained synonymous with help, not scandal. That contrast cut deeply. Kunle faced the cameras once, just once, before his lawyers intervened. His confidence was gone, replaced by exhaustion and disbelief. "She's destroying us," he said hoarsely. Adesola did not respond. Saad issued a written statement accepting responsibility for errors in judgment without naming the crime itself. The public saw through it. The court did not. Tunde entered a plea agreement offering full cooperation in exchange for leniency. He spoke openly of guilt, of cowardice, of regret that came too late. "I thought silence would protect us," he said. "It only buried us." The day charges were formally announced. The courtroom filled quietly. No shouting, no spectacle. Just the steady presence of consequence. Attempted murder, conspiracy, obstruction. Adesola sat in the back row, unobtrusive hands folded in her lap. She did not look at her children as the charges were read. She stared straight ahead, breathing evenly. Afterward, as reporters surged forward, a single question cut through the noise. Madame Mensah, a young journalist, asked, "Do you forgive them?" Adesola paused. Forgiveness was a word people used carelessly. She had learned often as a shortcut around accountability. "I forgive myself," she said finally, "for believing love would be enough." Then she walked away. In the weeks that followed, the truth settled into public memory, not as a scandal, but as a warning. Universities discussed it in ethics courses. Faith leaders spoke of it from pulpits. Parents whispered about it at dinner tables. Power, without character, they said, eats its own. On a quiet afternoon, Adesola visited the cliff. She stood at a safe distance. This time, the land unchanged the sky, as clear as it had been that day. She placed a small stone near the path, not as a marker of death, but of survival. "This is where you learned," she said softly to herself. "Not where you ended." She turned away without looking back. Truth had done its work. What remained was choice, what to do with the life she had been given back. Justice arrived quietly the way dawn does, without applause, without asking permission. The courts moved forward with steady discipline. Hearings were scheduled. Evidence was reviewed. Arguments were weighed. There were no shortcuts, no favors hidden behind old names. Adesola insisted on that. When prosecutors suggested expediting certain processes because of her status, she declined. "Let the law walk at its own pace," she said. "Rushing truth only creates shadows." Kunle's case advanced first. The weight of evidence pressed in from every side: digital records, witness testimony, the recovered voice note that captured panic instead of concern. His lawyers argued for misinterpretation, for stress, for family conflict gone tragically wrong. But the facts refused to bend. In court, Kunle looked smaller than he ever had behind podiums and cameras. The confidence that once filled rooms had evaporated. When asked to speak, he tried to sound composed, but bitterness leaked through. "She raised us to be strong," he said. "She shouldn't be surprised we acted." The judge's response was calm and firm. "Strength without restraint is not leadership," he said. "It is recklessness." Saad's proceedings followed. Hers were quieter, more technical: spreadsheets and schedules, permissions and payments. She listened without interruption as her decisions were laid bare, each one a brick in a path she had chosen deliberately. When it was her turn to speak, she surprised everyone. "I believed I was protecting our future," she said. "I told myself I was correcting an imbalance. I was wrong." Her voice did not tremble. Regret sat in it like a settled thing. Tunde's case was the most painful to watch. He took responsibility without argument, recounting the moment he chose silence over courage. His cooperation mattered. The court acknowledged it. "Remorse does not erase harm," the judge said, "but it informs accountability." Sentences were handed down carefully. Proportionate, deliberate. Not vengeance, not spectacle. Consequence. Adesola did not attend every session. When she did, she sat quietly, never seeking the camera, never reacting outwardly to outcomes. People expected satisfaction, perhaps relief. What they saw instead was restraint. After the final ruling, a reporter approached her outside the courthouse. "You could have destroyed them completely," the reporter said. "Why didn't you?" Adesola considered the question. "Destruction is easy," she replied. "It's rebuilding that takes discipline." She turned away, leaving the question unanswered in the air. In the weeks that followed, she made decisions that surprised many. She did not reclaim the mansion. She donated it to be converted into a leadership institute focused on ethics, governance, and community enterprise. Its halls would no longer echo with entitlement, but with debate and learning. She did not resume her role as CEO. Instead, she confirmed the independent leadership team, granting them full authority and clear boundaries. "Institutions must outgrow their founders," she said. "Otherwise, they fail when founders fall." She did not erase her children from history. Their names remained part of records, not as heirs, but as a cautionary chapter. Privately, she met with each of them once. Coonley arrived, guarded eyes hollow. He expected anger. He expected lectures. He received neither. "I won't visit you," Adesola said plainly, "and I won't speak against you. Your choices will speak long after my voice is gone." Coonley swallowed hard. "Do you hate me?" Adesola shook her head. "No," she said. "Hate would mean you still define me." Sade's meeting was brief. They spoke of systems of decisions, of the cost of believing intelligence alone could replace conscience. "You were always capable," Adesola said. "You just chose control over care." Sade nodded, once tears finally breaking through. "I don't expect forgiveness. You shouldn't," Adesola replied. "You should expect honesty." Tunde wept openly. He apologized again and again, words tumbling over each other in desperation. Adesola listened. When he finished, she placed a hand on the table between them. "Live in a way that doesn't require silence," she said. "That's all I can give you." After that, she closed the door gently, firmly on that part of her life. She returned her focus to the foundation and the communities she had learned from while hidden. She elevated leaders from within those spaces, refusing to sit at the center. She insisted on audits, on term limits, on succession planning. When you love something, she told her team, you plan for a future without you. The public narrative shifted. What had begun as a shocking return from presumed death became something else, a case study in restraint. Schools invited her to speak not about survival, but about systems. Churches asked her to talk not about forgiveness, but about boundaries. Businesses sought her counsel on governance, not growth alone. And always, she declined excessive praise. "Put it where it belongs," she said, "on the work." One evening, as the sun lowered itself behind the city skyline, Adesola sat on a simple balcony, a cup of tea warming her hands. BC called to check in. Lacan had started school and was thriving. The cooperatives were expanding on their own. "You sound lighter," BC said. "I am," Adesola replied. Justice can do that when it's not mixed with revenge. She had learned that justice without revenge does not numb pain. It clarifies it. It draws lines that protect the living and honor the truth. It refuses to let anger decide the future. As night settled, Adesola opened her notebook and wrote one final line: "Mercy without accountability is permission. Accountability without mercy is cruelty." She closed the book. The chapter was not healed, but it was whole. And that was enough. The last choice Adesola Mensah made was not written in any court document, board resolution, or public announcement. It was quieter than all the others. Months had passed since the verdicts. The noise had faded. No more breaking news banners, no more urgent debates. Life had settled into a new rhythm, one shaped by consequences rather than chaos. Adesola now lived in a modest house on the edge of the city. No gates, no armed guards, just space light and mornings that began without alarms. She worked fewer hours but with greater intention. Every decision she made now was guided by a single question. Does this build people, or does it control them? One afternoon, she received 3 letters. They arrived on the same day, delivered by the same courier, each envelope bearing a familiar handwriting she had not seen in a long time. Her children. She did not open them immediately. Instead, she brewed tea and sat by the window watching people pass, vendors calling out prices, children running barefoot, a woman laughing into her phone. Ordinary life continuing as it always had, indifferent to her pain and her power alike. When she finally opened the first letter, Kunle's words were stiff formal. He spoke of regret, in careful phrases, of lessons learned, of time lost. He did not ask for forgiveness. He asked for understanding. The second letter from Said was longer, precise, honest. She acknowledged the choices she had made without excuse, dissecting them the way she once dissected balance sheets. She wrote of shame, not the kind that hides, but the kind that forces reflection. The third letter was Tunde's. It was messy, ink smudged, lines crossed out and rewritten. He apologized without structure, without restraint. He spoke of fear, of cowardice, of nights haunted by the sound of falling. He asked not for pardon, but for a chance to live differently. Adesola folded the letters carefully and placed them back on the table. She did not cry. She had done enough of that in the past year alone, unseen, when tears were necessary, but useless. Instead, she thought. She thought of the cliff. She thought of BC and Lacan. She thought of the young leaders now running projects without her name attached. She thought of the woman she had been before the fall, certain, commanding, exhausted. And she thought of the woman she was now. Forgiveness, she realized, was not a single act. It was a boundary, with a door not always open, not always closed, but deliberate. A week later, she wrote back. 3 letters, 3 different answers. To Kunle, she wrote briefly. She acknowledged his regret, but made no promises. Understanding, as she wrote, comes after accountability has reshaped behavior, not before. To Sade, she wrote with clarity. She recognized her honesty and encouraged her to continue the work of self-examination. Intelligence without humility, she wrote, is only another form of blindness. To Tunde, she wrote the longest letter. I cannot undo what you allowed, she wrote, but I can choose not to define you only by your worst moment. Live in a way that makes silence unnecessary. That will be our beginning, nothing more, nothing less. She sealed the envelopes and sent them without ceremony. That was her final choice as their mother. Not reconciliation, not rejection, but distance shaped by truth. In the months that followed, Adesola focused on legacy, not as inheritance, but as impact. She formally stepped away from all executive influence, retaining only an advisory role in the foundation she had designed to survive without her. She insisted on annual independent reviews. She trained successors, then stepped back again. When asked why she did not return fully to power, she answered simply, "Because power nearly became the reason I died." She spent time teaching not from stages, but in small rooms. She spoke to young women about resilience, to young men about restraint, to families about boundaries disguised as love. One evening, she visited the Leadership Institute housed in her former mansion. Students filled the rooms where her children once argued over entitlement. She stood quietly at the back, listening to a debate about ethics and succession planning. A young woman raised her hand and said, "Leadership fails when people confuse access with ownership." Adesola smiled. That night, she walked through the empty halls alone. At the front entrance, she paused and looked back, not with longing, but with closure. The cliff no longer appeared in her dreams. In its place came something else: wide, land-open paths, unfinished work. She had survived betrayal. She had faced truth without flinching. She had chosen justice without revenge. And now she chose peace without forgetting. Somewhere in the city, her children lived with the consequences of their choices. Somewhere else, communities thrived without knowing her full story. Somewhere further still, a boy named Lekatien studied hard, unaware of how deeply his kindness had changed the course of a powerful woman's life. Adesola Mensah did not return to reclaim what was taken from her. She returned to decide who she would become after everything was stripped away. And in that choice, she found something inheritance could never buy: freedom. Life does not test us when everything is easy. It tests us when love, power, and fear collide. This story reminds us that kindness without boundaries can invite betrayal, and power without character can destroy its own roots. True strength is not found in revenge, but in the courage to choose truth, even when it costs us the people we love most. Adesola's journey teaches us that inheritance is not what we leave behind, but what we live out every day. Integrity, accountability, and compassion, guided by wisdom. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and justice does not require cruelty. Sometimes, the bravest choice is to walk forward without carrying hatred with us. What would you have done in her place? Would you forgive, walk away, or fight back? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if stories of moral strength, human truth, and hope speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe and walk this journey with us.